Hi there, I'm Jake from JKM Guitars, and I've just got a top to carve here, so I thought I'd go through the process with you to show you how I go about doing it. As you can tell, I'm a little bit loaded with a cold, but we'll persevere through and we'll be getting on fine. So here is a Western Red Cedar soundboard with split Sitka spruce struts, and everything's a bit heavy at the minute, everything's a bit oversized. So then what we want to do is then carve it all down to look like this. So everything will have a curved back profile, scalloped ends, and then all the excess weight from the edges of the brace will be carved back. So I'll just go through a little process of how I go about doing it, and then some tips and tricks to help you achieve good results with your own soundboard. So for a start, I mount the soundboard on a radius dish with these two little clamps, and then the radius dish is mounted onto this angled raised bed on a little pin, so I can spin around freely, give you full access, and then this toggle here locks it in place to stop it from spinning. I'd strongly recommend you building a base, especially if you're going to do more than one of these, just because working when the soundboard's flat against the table, you end up bent over a lot. Your back will end up killing you. You look like a prawn. So having the raised bed is really helpful, especially if you're going to be doing multiple of these or spend a long time doing them. It really helps out, so it's definitely worth setting one up. I took about half an hour to make one. As for the tools for the job, you will need a chisel. So I have an 18mm Japanese chisel here. It's got a long handle and it's also bent in the middle. The bend in the middle is really useful, as when you come to carve alongside the brace, the handle is away from the face of the material, while if you had a standard Western carpentry chisel, you wouldn't be able to get very far into the soundboard before the handle makes contact with the surface. So if you can find one, I think they're sometimes called dogleg chisels, which has an angle to it. That means you can basically run the chisel the whole way across the surface of the board without having to worry about the handle getting in the way. The extra length of the handle helps as well when you hold it into the base of your palm here. It feels like you get a lot more control with how you move it, and you can a lot more easily tailor the angle of the cuts, especially when cleaning up the edges of the soundboard, edges of the brace. Having the ability to really control how you cut is very useful as well. And then just a little small one as well, just to help pick out any of the glue from inside the corners. I also have a leather strop with a polishing compound. This is good just to re-hone the edge of your blade, so instead of having to get your waterstones back out, just drop it on this a few times and you'll be back to cutting speed then. And then last but not least, this little rosewood veneer. It's about 2mm thick, and what the job of this is to slot over around a brace so that when you come to scallop the ends, they'll always end up being the same height. And this is really useful when you come to fitting the soundboard to the sides. You can then route the notches that these braces will slot into, all at the same thickness, at the same height, sorry. And then all these braces will be a lot easier to fit into the sides if you use this as a kind of guide. So that's very useful and helps speed up the process as well. So I've decided to weigh the soundboard here just so I can see the difference in weight before we started, and then about halfway through, and then at the end, just to kind of give an idea of how much material you actually remove from the braces. Everything's a little bit heavy and rough right now. Nothing's at the final height apart from the center of this X brace. That's going to be the same sort of height at the finish, but everything else is going to get tailored down and shaped and profiled. So there's two real ways you can carve braces, and I'll just try and give an example for you here. So the way I do it is called parabolic curve or parabolic carving. So what I would do is pick a single high point, and then from that point on I will do a smooth continuous curve towards the end of the brace and the other side. So then there's just one high spot, and then you scoop it and make it a nice curve on the top otherwise. What's more common in Western guitars like Gibsons and Martins, they would have scalloped braces, so they'd have 2 high points and then scallop down that way and that way, and then the middle here would be hollowed out as well. So that means that you'd have 2 high points, 2 stiff areas, and then this way you can tailor whereabouts you want these stiffer portions to be. The only reason I don't do it like this is just at the Loudon guitars where I used to work, this was the method we used, and I'm just very familiar with it, very used to it. And then also when you come to doing these scallop braces, as you're removing material from both directions, you can run the risk here of, if you catch the grain wrong, splitting the wood. So it's a little bit trickier to do, while this one's a lot more streamlined. It's a bit quicker to kind of get it done. So then once I've carved the top of the bracing, I will then scallop the ends using this jig here, and then after then I will mark a center line down the brace and then remove material from the edges in order to give a real high peak, and remove as much material from the sides as possible, because they don't really add to the stiffness of the material. It's really the height that adds to the stiffness. So any excess weight we can remove. The reason you want to keep your bracing as light as possible is because the lighter the soundboard, the less energy from the strings you'd need to reach the same volume as if the soundboard was braced much heavier. So the lighter it is, the less energy you need to play in order to get a good projection. So that's the real aim with it. All these struts are split from a block of Sitka spruce. That's the best way of getting all the grain on the quarter, and then having the grain run straight down the whole length of the piece. Obviously not everyone can get the material or do this themselves, so you'll be buying more brace stock, which is pre-cut to these sorts of lengths and dimensions. The only thing to watch out for there is how the grain looks along the back of the strut. Make sure it's not too wiggly or wobbly, because then you've got to just pay attention to that. If you start cutting it in the wrong direction, you're going to go against the grain, and that can cause you bother and break out and stuff like that. So whenever I glue the braces onto the top, I don't worry at that point about cleaning the glue off. The reason behind this is because I find that when I try and remove it while it's still wet, I end up smudging and smearing it. You can kind of see a little bit down here, there's a bit of smearing. So that's actually a lot more difficult to remove than where it beads up like down here. So as long as you don't apply too much glue to the brace to begin with, you should just end up with these tiny little runs of glue, and as long as you don't press them in or tamper with them, they'll pop off as soon as you touch them with a chisel. So I find that's a lot easier to get a cleaner finish, and it saves me a lot more time than it would be to try and clean off the majority of the glue when gluing the braces on, and then being left with loads of this residue here, which is a lot trickier to clean off. Another thing on these guitars is they will have a additional pentagon support, so this is glued in as the bracing is glued on. So it means that this part around the back of the sound hole is about twice as thick as the rest of the soundboard, and it just helps reinforce this whole area. So you want this transverse brace, I've got these 2 braces either side of the pentagon, and then this backing pentagon here, all making this section really rigid and strong, because this is really the only section that's stopping the neck from being pulled into the soundboard once the string tension's on. Another thing I do to help keep this area nice and strong is by using a neck block with an extended tongue here, similar in style to the slipper heel you see on classical guitars. This is a bit rough and ready, but it would be sitting just behind here, nearly butting up against the transverse brace, and that will make this entire section really rigid and rock solid. So before I start carving as well, I remove the sound hole. The reason for this is it should help me get a more accurate representation of how the soundboard's vibrating when I'm tapping it. Some people carve all the braces and then remove that. It doesn't make a huge difference obviously, but I think it will help towards helping me get a truer representation of how the soundboard is acting, how it's vibrating, if it's stiff or flexible once that's removed. So what you really want is a lot of stiffness along the length of the board, and then you can be a little bit more flexible widthways. So that's the kind of aim. You want the length of the board to be as stiff as you can have, because that's obviously, you're trying to prevent the bridge from being torqued in once the strings are on. So you need this area to be quite strong. But widthways, you don't need as much strength. You want that to have a bit more flexibility, so then you can really get your soundboard moving and vibrating and producing a nice tone. So I'll just give you a quick tap before I've started, and then halfway through once I've done the rough profiling, and then at the end once I've done all the final shaping, to give you an idea of how it's all coming together. So it has a nice kind of fundamental note and a kind of a higher level of ring to it, and it does sustain quite nicely. So what we should find as we remove more material, it should kind of sound lower and then have a kind of deeper fundamental note to it as we're removing weight from the braces. To start off, I always like to do the X brace top profile first, just to kind of get me started up, and then I work around by doing the transverse brace, and then all the other ones just as I go. So some tips with holding your chisel: try and hold it in the palm of your hand like this, so it butts in, and then you have a good control of it. And then your second hand, always have it behind the blade. I know that sounds obvious, but the number of scars I've got on my hand shows I forget myself. So make sure your workpiece is secure, so you don't have to worry about this moving anywhere, so you don't have to hold it down while you're chiseling. And then hold the blade behind, and then you can also use your fingers as a kind of reference or a guide to stop your chisel from driving into the soundboard. So especially when we're doing the side profiles, I'll show you again later, I usually have a finger just underneath like this, 2 fingers on top, and then that means that my blade is kept at an equal height above the soundboard, because you don't want to have to accidentally drag your blade through the wood. It marks really easy and it's very hard to get out. So we'll just start by doing the top profiles, and then I'll take you through the steps from there. One good thing to do as well is to cut at a slight angle instead of square to the brace. What this does is gives it more of a slicing motion, and you should find that your blade cuts a lot easier. So if you have any trouble with particularly stiff or dense brace and it's giving you some bother, just try tilting the blade at an angle, say 45 degrees, and you should find that it slices through a lot easier. It's really clean mirror finish. If you find that there's any kind of score marks or drag marks on your piece as you're cutting, it would mean that there's a nick in the blade, so maybe go back and resharpen it. You want a nice sharp blade when doing this sort of job, because the last thing you want to do is push too hard into the material to try and make up for the fact your blade's blunt, and then you could crack the brace or shoot off or lose your balance, stab yourself, stab the soundboard, whatever it will be. So a sharp blade is always preferred. So with this one here, I like to kind of curve down to where this brace meets and then scallop from there. And for this one, I try and keep most of the height up until the back of this bridge plate and then tailor it off, just so there's as much support for the bridge as possible, as the tails of the bridge will fit just over the brace like that there. And then just feel down the back of the brace, make sure it's nice and smooth. If there's any lumps, just roll your blade over nice and smoothly, and that should take off any high spots. So this end of the brace here is getting a little bit short on me, So that would indicate that the grain is just raising up like this here. So you need to watch out for that. You can remove a lot of it in the same direction as I'm doing now, but then just at the end when you're trying to clean it up and when you're using this jig thing, it would help to go from the opposite direction. So I'll show you that when I get around to it. So once you spot it kind of cracking off or behaving in a way you wouldn't expect it to, just take it easy, take a step back and assess what direction would be preferable to get the job done as well as you can. You're always going to find, especially with the X brace, because it's such a long brace, it's very hard to get, you know, 14 inches or whatever it is of spruce to be perfectly in a straight line the whole length of it. You're much more likely going to have a little bit at the end that's going to misbehave. So just go back about 1.5 inches and then start scalloping, and then once we've got a lot of the material removed and a lot of the weight removed, we can reassess it and then bring it back a bit further if need be to make it more flexible. So again, this is where the slicing motion will help if you're having a bit of trouble. As you can see, it's starting to break up on me, so I'll just approach it from the opposite direction. And then I'll just clean off those kind of bits of shaving there. To clean up the transverse brace, I just even it up with a plane first, and then I just start from the center and work down one way and then turn it around and work down the other way. Again, you want this one to be quite rigid and quite strong, so you don't need to remove too much material. And these two braces either side of the pentagon are completely slotted into this brace to make it extra secure. And again, holding my blade away, keeping my fingers away from the front of the blade, and it also gives me a lot more security, so I'd have no chance of slipping and stabbing the soundboard in this position. And then just do the other side. These two here don't take a whole lot of work. Cut them in a straight line from about 1.5 centimeters in to where it meets the pentagon's height. Because of the height of this brace, it means it's easier for me to do the back of the chisel. It's a little harder to then keep the straightness of the cut because you haven't got the flat as a reference. So it's just worth taking your time, feeling the brace every few cuts. There we go. And just see how you get on. Again, holding the chisel, can't get away from me. I can't drive it into the soundboard. And maybe I can get a little bit firmer with my cuts because I know I'm quite secure with how it's being held. And don't worry too much if you poke the X brace while you're doing these ones, because you're going to end up removing the sides anyway, so any kind of poke marks with the chisel corners will be removed. Which is why I like to do these 4 braces first before I do the X brace, because I'm more than likely going to end up poking the X brace while I'm getting these to the right shape. So then when I finally carve the X brace, all those marks get removed. So these are the next ones I approach. I know they're a little bit tall from what I'm used to, so I'll just take down the heights of them first. I like I said, these four aren't really adding to the strength lengthwise. They're more to tailor how well it flexes from left to right. I usually pick a kind of high spot, and then I'll start my curve from this mark. You can tailor the mark how you want to, tailor the high spot where you want to, just from trial and error. This is kind of a good spot to be in, and then you can tailor it once you do your kind of tap tests, and you go back and forth until you're happy with how everything's sounding really. It's always better to leave the braces a little higher than you think they might need to be, because it's much easier to remove material than it is to put it back on. So just leave things a little bit chunkier, a little bit taller than you need to, and then just tailor it down as you go. This is the first few times you've been doing this. Just flex the top a lot, keep tapping it a lot every now and then. Once you do a kind of a group of things, just for yourself really, so you can kind of start making your own internal reference for how things should sound and how things alter once you do this sort of thing or that sort of thing. And you kind of build a little repertoire in your head of the sounds you like to hear while carving these tops. So to do these curves, I like to start at the very end and just remove the bulk of the material. Again, I've got my fingers on the blade, out of the way, and just doing lots of little cuts so I don't have to try and remove a lot of material in one go. And then doing a bit of a slicing cut as well, so I could start on the right hand side of the blade, and then by the time I get to the other side of the brace, I'll have moved over, and that helps slice through the wood as well, just like that. So that's a really useful tip. It helps keep your blade sharp as well, I think, because you're using it more effectively. So even when I do these scallops, I'll start on the right hand side, and then I'll move through to the left and just slice through the wood. So this rosewood piece here helps support the half lap joint that the X brace is made from. It makes the area much more rigid and strong, and it's very important to include one of these in your builds. You sometimes see the old guitars which have like a kind of fabric piece covered in glue. It's doing the same sort of job. So this is a nice little wooden feature. So I will just blend this in with the curve of this X brace here. You can also use mahogany for this, or cherry, walnut, whatever you have to hand. And again, just using a slicing motion really helps, and then just blend those curves together. So now we've got the transverse brace, the ones beside the pentagon, and the X brace carved along with these small ones here. It's down to the radial braces down the bottom here. So I always like to try and keep the center one tall, and then it gradually get lower down as it fans out. Like I said, you can always leave things more proud and then work your way down as you go. Just keep tap testing, see how it sounds, see if you want it to be more flexible or not. So the peak for these are about 2 or 3 centimeters behind the bridge plate, and then they'll scallop at the ends here as well, and then I can tailor how deep the scallop is to make it more flexible if I need to. So again, just start at the ends, take the corner off, and then as you're going down the curve, just lift the back of your hand up, and then that will help you get into the smooth curve you're looking for. Lots of little tiny shavings, and that will help you remove material without having to use too much force. And then just at the end, a few slicing cuts, just so you can remove material without applying any force into the brace, and that means you can get a real clean finish just at the end there. So I'm not really applying any force into where the bridge plate is going to be. I'm not pushing like this, I'm just cutting like that, just slicing away. Again, just kind of slice at the end, helps keep everything under control. Alright, so that's the main profiling done. I think these are a little bit tall still, so they'll come down a bit later on. It'll be a good reference to stop here and see how it's sounding. Okay, there's quite a big difference. So by doing that, we've currently removed 45 grams worth of brace material, which has actually taken the weight of this top by a sixth and removed it. So that's a good place to start. I think we'll probably shave another 30 grams off once we've removed the weight off the size of the bracing. So it's already sounding very nice. It's got a lot of kind of rumble to it, and it's nice sustain, a good decay of the note. And as for flexing, when we flex this way along the length of the grain, we don't want there to be very much movement at all. So that feels very rigid and stiff, which is what we want. And then when we go off the width, this is still quite stiff, but I'd like that to loosen up a little bit. So the way I would go about doing that is by pulling back the scallops of this and this brace, by reducing the height or even increasing the scallops of these four braces here. I'd leave these ones as is, the higher end of the X brace near the pentagon, because again that's keeping this whole middle section very strong, and we need that because we've got a big hole in the middle of the soundboard here. We'll move on to carving the side profiles, and also at this point it's quite easy to remove the glue because everything's kind of removed, got less size to it, it's easy to get into. So to remove the glue using your dogleg chisel, it's quite simple. Just nice and gently, making sure you don't lift the handle up too high because then you'll start stabbing the soundboard, so you want to keep it quite flush, and the glue will just pop away as you go along. And again, like I said, as long as you're quite cautious with how much glue you put on in the first place, this shouldn't be a whole lot of work for you to get rid of the glue. Okay, so now all the glue is cleaned off. Make sure your work surface is completely clear. Any little hard bits of glue will punch through cedar like nothing else, so make sure your workstation is clean before putting it back on, and make sure it's all tidy. So we're going to start with removing some of the weight off of the main transverse brace. We don't need to do too much to this one because we want to keep it strong and supported. So we're just going to shave off the corners basically just a little bit. So I've re-stropped my blade with the leather strop there, so it's cutting nice and fine. We'll just start at the middle and then work to the edge. do the same the other side, and then you shouldn't run into any end grain that way. So there we go. So now I'll start with these 4 side braces here. Like I said, we're most likely going to knock into the X brace while doing this carving, so then we will remove those little dings once we do the side profile of the X brace. So just imagine that your brace has a center line down it, and then that's what we want to do, is carve into that center line. We want to leave about a millimeter and a half on the top as a kind of spine. So because the brace has a lot of different heights, that's where the long handle chisel and the twisting comes in. So at the lower point, you'll want to have it at a steeper angle to get to that center point, and then as you get to the high part of the brace, you'll twist it flatter, more 90 degrees, and then once you get past the high point, you'll bring it back down again, and that will keep the center line spine nice and even. So keep an eye on your braces, make sure you have a look at the direction of the grain, and that will help indicate whether you can approach both sides of the cut from one direction, or if you need to do one from one side and one from the other. And then of course, after your first few cuts, you should get a good idea. So this here, you can hear it kind of crunching and cracking. It's not coming off in the nicest of shavings, so that's indicating to me that it'd be better for me to cut from the opposite direction. So I'll see on the other side here, see whether it's the same sort of thing. That's not too bad, it's a bit better. Still a little bit coarse, so I'll cut this entire brace from this direction. It's a little trickier now because we're having to go a bit steeper at an angle to avoid knocking into the top of this X brace here. But just keep your fingers wrapped around it, press them onto a brace or part of the soundboard as a sort of support, and that will help hold your chisel up high and away from the soundboard. Just go nice and gently, take off the smallest shavings you can. Don't push too hard, because this is the time when you can slip and drag your chisel across the soundboard. And although no one's ever going to see the inside of this soundboard, it's always nice to know that you've done a good job. So this is here, I'm rolling the chisel over as I get to the low part of this brace in order to keep that spine level. And here I'm having to go quite high up with the back of the handle, and then I've got it held between my 2 fingers and my thumb at the back of this ridge here, and then the rest of my fingers are locked onto the soundboard, so everything's got a support to it, so there's no freeness to this chisel. It's all locked in place, and I'm just doing these tiny moving slice cuts in order to get through without any issue. And then drop the handle. So get as close to the bottom of the strut as you're comfortable doing. If you want to leave a millimeter or 2 of a kind of wall, then that's fine. Obviously the more material you can remove, the less weight there will be, the better the final product will be. So I'm just cleaning up these edges here, making sure they're nice and flat across the whole side of the strut like that. And if there's any bumpy bits, I'll just glide the chisel over the top of it and take that off. Just like that. And then just at the inside here, there's still a bit of meat, so I just want to trim that back. But because there's such a small amount of material, it's a lot less likely that it will kind of split out, even though we're going against the direction we were working at before. So I'm a little bit more confident. As long as I take slow, light passes, I won't run into any difficulties. Once you come to sanding it, you just want to sand the edges and then just a light pass over the top so you don't widen out that spine too much. So then we just move over to the other struts. So it's a very tactile job this. You gotta listen to the wood, you gotta feel it, whether it's giving you any resistance, and then visually as well. If you get a very clean face after your cut, you're usually going in the right direction. If the face is a little bit coarse or there seems to be kind of fibers being pulled away, then that would indicate that you're best to go in the other direction. So one thing to watch out for is if you get your spine too pointy, you could end up kind of cutting clean through it, and then that will reduce the height of your strut. So I'm very close to having that happen here. So I'm just gonna remove a little bit of material off the top and then bring that millimeter wide spine back onto the brace. So now we've got these 4 side ones carved. Now we can move on to doing the X brace. Once we've got this kind of done, we can start tapping and tuning and stuff like that. And then if these heights need to be adjusted or the peaks need to be adjusted, that can be done, and then just shaving off a little bit of the size to bring that peak back to the 1mm mark. So to do these, you have to approach it a little bit differently, because they're a little harder to get into, especially in the center. So what you do is start in the middle of the X, use the back of the chisel, keep your handle up quite high. Again, I'm wrapping my fingers around it so it can't go flying. And then just doing little scoops. So as you cut, you pull the handle back in towards you, and that'll pull the blade back out. And then you just want to start making that little recess into the strut. We're not going the whole way across the strut just yet. We just want that inside curve done first, because that's the tricky bit. And then we'll marry that up from the other side. So even if you've got these shavings still left on, that's no problem. Just hollow out that little area there. You can see that's where we're left with. So we've got start of the spine here, and we've got about 1 centimeter or so of flat between the X-brace support and the start of our cut. So from this point on, we can start removing the weight off of the edges. Again, holding underneath the chisel so it doesn't run away from me, and stab into the pentagon. And go nice and easy, not in any rush. And then this way round, I've got the chisel resting on my fingertip, got all the other fingers locked onto a strut. And that will help me do the job without any risk. So just to marry into that first cut, just do loads of small light slices and just bring those 2 different sections, the flat and that curve, in together. This is the trickiest bit of the carving job, so feel free to take it easy. And then once this is done, it's plain sailing from here, really. Of course, you've got to do it 3 more times, but it's just all part of it. Again, just going in really steep and then just slicing into it really. I want to get a clean cut. It's best to leave the spine, if you're doing this for the first few times, leave this a bit broader, because the last thing you want to do is cut clean through the top of the spine, because then that will mean you have to reduce the height of the brace, and we don't want to do that. And then I'll just clean the top off, just a wee shaving. So you can see the difference. So we've taken quite a lot of material off, and then because we've kept the height, it will still be a strong piece of wood and hold everything else together. So there, the side profile carving for the X brace is done. You got to make sure that everything's nice and straight and nice and even on the edges. But I'll give it a tap now before we start doing these 5 braces, so we can kind of see how the changes. So it's really starting to sound like it's coming alive, which is nice, especially seeing as we've still got these 5 braces to work on as well. A very similar profile to how these were done. Just imagine they've got a center line running down them. And then keep an eye out for the direction of the grain. For example, most of these are pretty straight. This one here is going off to the left just a little bit at this end here, which means I'll need to approach it in one direction going one way, and the opposite going the other way to prevent any short grain pulling out there. Okay, so here it is, all carved. There's still the ability to tweak the heights of things, the scallops, and that sort of thing. But so far, it's sounding very nice. And as for the stiffness, there's still a lot of strength in the length of it, which is what we're looking for. And side to side, it's got a little give, but I think we can probably get a little bit more out of it. So to do that, I will just pull back the scoops, the scallops on these outside braces here. Now I've already got the ends to the right height, so I won't go too far. To remove some of the strength they'll have along the width of the top. And then even the base side of the X brace, I'll just pull that back another centimetre or so. And then also the base side of the fan frets, not fan frets, sorry, fan braces. Let's help till a little bit with side to side flexibility. Still got barely any give on the length of it. I can take a little bit of height off of these 5 here. Great. Now a few of them, the spines have gotten a little bit wide, so I can just shave off the edge a little bit. Make sure that spine is kept right down the center of the brace, so you can tailor whether you move material from the right side or left side just to bring that over. Alright, top's all carved. All it needs to do now is get a final sanding, so I go through the grits 180 and 240 just to clean up the edges, remove any lumps and bumps and give it a nice kind of even finish. And I also kind of sand in between the braces as well to make sure it's all very even and smooth. As for the strength of it, there's a bit of flex going this way, which is good, and then this way there's nothing really. I can feel a little bit of movement, but not that much, which is great. And I think it's come along as well, so I'll give you a little tap test. Obviously the tapping like that is only a kind of helpful guide, as of course this is an open plate like a cymbal, and then as soon as you glue it to the edges it'll be a closed plate like a drum skin. So obviously they'll behave differently, but it's just a very good idea to get used to how the material feels, how it sounds, how what work you do affects the sound in one way or another. So it's just good to get a kind of mental catalogue, if you will, of tones in your ears of what citrus spruce would sound like, or cedar would sound like, in comparison with each other after you've worked on it and beforehand. So I'll give you a tap of the cedar again, and then I'll play the Sitka, and so you can kind of hear how those two woods sound different once they're braced up. So here's the cedar. And the Sitka spruce. So the Sitka spruce is a heavier material. The cedar top finally came down to 230 grams. So all the carving removed 60 grams of the weight, which is 1/5 of the total weight to begin with, while the Sitka spruce is sitting at 275 grams for this soundboard, which is an extra 45 grams of weight. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it all adds up in the end once you get your bridge on and your saddle piece and all the rest. Obviously the lighter the top, the better it will be to translate your playing into sound, which is why cedar tops are normally found on fingerstyle guitars, because they require a lighter touch to get the sound to come out, while Sitka spruce is much more favourable towards flat picking, because you're going to have more power in the pick and a harder attack, and then it will handle the harder attack better. So all these different materials have their own qualities, but they're all suited to different kind of styles as well. Well, I hope you've found that useful. If you have any questions or queries, please drop me a message in the comment section and I'll try and get back to you. And if you want to see anything described in a future video, just let me know and I'll try and get around to doing that for you. Well, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you sometime soon.